good evening and blessings to everybody. Tonight is Tuesday night, so it's Q&A time. So I think we have a few questions tonight.
Dear Lumpur, why do we offer monks' robes on special occasions, such as what we saw in the funeral ceremony for Tan Ajahn father last week? Thank you.
Well, Buddhist monks have four main requisites, basic requisites. That's alms food, robes or cloth for making robes, accommodation, which in its simplest form is the foot of a tree, but could be a building like a hut or some kind of accommodation building, and then medicine for when we're sick. And these are the most basic necessities for a human being to live in the world. And the Buddha allowed us, to have a certain amount of comfort. And so we need, as alms mendicants, we're beggars, we need cloth. So traditionally in the time of the Buddha, it was common for monks to spend some of their time going out into the countryside looking for scrap cloth, discarded cloth, what we call bangsakula, chivara. And cloth was very hard to come by in India in those days. Even these days it's still considered something worth money and a luxury to some of the poorer people. So monks could spend quite a lot of time looking around for scraps of cloth left by the side of the road or in rubbish tips, or one of the most common sources of discarded cloth that monks would take to make their robes would be from a corpse. Before it was cremated, corpses were usually wrapped in some kind of cloth prior to the cremation, and then just before the cremation the cloth would be pulled off the corpse. And it was a tradition, people with faith in Buddhist monks would leave the corpse cloth on a tree nearby where the cremation was held. So that tradition is carried on until this present day, although there are very few open-air cremations nowadays, even in Buddhist countries. They do still happen, and that tradition has been continued. Monks can go and collect cloth, that bangsakula or discarded cloth from the tree near a corpse, where a corpse has been cremated. But of course, over the years, over the centuries, the world has become more wealthy. That includes Buddhists, so there's less need for monks to go searching for scrap or discarded cloth. More cloth is available in shops and markets, and so the tradition has grown up. People will buy cloth and offer it to monks so that it can be used to make into robes, because every monk will have at least their three main robes. The outer robe, which you see me wearing on my shoulder, which doubles as a cloak. It's called a sangati, and we can wear it when we go out on alms round or when we're cold, or use it as a simple mattress when we're sleeping. And we have our jivara, our main robe, or uttara sankha it's called, and that's the one you see us wearing most often. Then we have an underrobe, which is like a skirt, the sabong or antrawasaka. But we also have some other robes, say like in the cold weather we have these long-sleeved, what we call anksas, kind of like shirt-like robes we wear for the cold. And we may have a bathing cloth, a sitting cloth. We sit on a cloth. I have a sitting cloth here. So we have a few extra robes. All of that requires cloth. So the tradition has grown up to offer cloth to monks to make these various robes. And so all of our monks, we learn how to sew. Sometimes we dye the cloth. Even in Australia, sometimes we'll use white cloth and dye it. And in Thailand, we used to use the heartwood from the jackfruit tree. If you know the jackfruit, the heartwood from that tree has a sort of orangey brown colour, and you can make a good dye for white cloth out of it. And we also wash our robes in that jackfruit dye every week or two. It's boiled up, and so you maintain the colour of your robes, and you also, it cleans the cloth. It acts as an astringent, takes out grease and dirt from cloth. So that's where the colour of our robes comes from. So whether the cloth has been offered formally or collected by the monk, it is sewn into robes, dyed, and then worn. But because the world is a wealthier place and people are very generous nowadays, people will offer not only unsewn cloth, like a bolt of white cloth they've purchased, they might offer pre-made robes. So you get people who will sew monks' robes and sell them, and the faithful will sometimes buy them and come to monasteries to offer them. And you'll see the most common times people offer robes is at a katina ceremony, which is only held once a year, and only when 5 monks or more spend the rains retreat, the 3 months rains retreat, which we're about to enter next month. If you've had 5 monks or more spending time together in retreat, then you're allowed to have a katina ceremony. So that's a time people bring cloth to offer for the Sangha, again, to stop them having to go out looking for discarded cloth. People don't want the monks having to do that. They have the faith, and the Buddha made this allowance to offer katina cloth. At other times, you can only have a katina during a very brief period of time at the end of the retreat, once a year. So at other times, people sometimes offer what we call papa, or forest cloth, where they'll buy white cloth, or they'll purchase pre-made, pre-sewn robes and bring them and offer them to the monks at those occasions. And then also funerals are a time where people like to offer cloth or robes to monks, and particularly to share the merit with their loved ones who have passed away. And the traditional belief is that, when you go to your next life, you're going to need clothes in your next life. Clothes are a basic necessity that humans need to be warm, to be covered, and you don't want your loved ones to be without the basic necessities next life. So you offer, at a funeral, you might offer robes and other requisites and food, of course, hoping to make good karma both for yourself in your future and also for your loved ones who passed away. And one other thing is that these robes, they're called the banner of the Arahants. They're like the uniform or the flag or the symbol of all the enlightened beings, monks and nuns, since the time of the Buddha, including the Buddha himself, and since the time of the Buddha, all his enlightened disciples have worn these robes. So people with a lot of faith in the Buddha and his teachings, they love to offer robes, because you feel good when you source some cloth, or you make a robe which you're going to offer, or you purchase a robe which you're going to offer. You feel good because it's that which the Arahants, since the time of the Buddha to the present day, have worn. It's the same thing they've worn. People feel very happy to provide that for monks and to see monks. They have a saying, a story in the time of the Buddha. Venerable Moggallana was the monk who was considered to have the foremost psychic powers. And he could enter jhana, and then he could travel to other realms of existence and see ghosts and heaven realms and hell realms. And they say one time he was traveling through a hell realm, and somebody in the hell realm had previously been a Buddhist, but they'd made some bad karma, so they were reborn in a heaven realm. And they just saw the monk Moggallana floating by, and they just saw the corner of his robe, but the colour and the distinctive pattern that we have in our robes brought up a moment of faith in their mind, reminding them of their previous faith in the Buddha and his teachings and the good that they've done. And that was enough for their mind to rise up out of its unwholesome state of suffering, being caught in a hell realm, and be reborn instantly in a heaven realm. So people have that kind of respect and love for the robes and what they symbolize. So they love to offer robes. And they're an easy thing to remember, isn't it? If you offer some robes to a monk or monks, you tend to remember that. Oh, I offered robes at this event or on that occasion. It sticks in your mind, and often that it will bring you happiness, remembering that act of generosity. So it's become a tradition to offer robes. Sometimes nowadays we get offered so much, so many robes, so much cloth, we have a cupboard full of it, and so we share it with other monasteries. So here we offered a lot of robes, so we share them with other monasteries that have less robes. And again, that's something the Buddha encouraged us to do as monks. If you ever are offered too much, because that's something you can't really control, who offers you what. But if you're offered too much, well, you share it with those who are in need. So we look around for those monks or monasteries where they maybe have less, and we share with them.
Luang Por, when I meditate, do I have to practice anapanasati first, or do I have to sit and watch the thoughts from the beginning?
Well, if anapanasati, mindfulness of breathing, is your main object, probably the best way to begin your meditation, having established a comfortable posture, is to bring your attention to the feeling of the in and out breath, as the beginning of your meditation. But it's just normal that some days you'll find it easier than others. Some days your mind settles down quickly, and you can keep your attention with the sensation of the in and out breath more successfully. And then other days your mind is very distracted. Maybe that will depend on physically how tired or energetic you feel. It'll depend on what's been happening in your life. Maybe strong emotional reactions to things have been triggered, or you've been very busy, or you're very distracted or excited about something. So there'll be some occasions when you find it very difficult to pay attention to the breath because it's so subtle an object. That's one reason why we practice chanting as well. When we chant, it's like preparing ourselves for meditation, reciting teachings, recollections of the Buddha Dhamma Sangha. This is a very good way to begin your meditation, is do some chanting first. Then put your effort into paying attention to the breath. But if sometimes you find it very difficult to stay with the breath and the mind is thinking a lot, one way you can adjust your meditation if you really find it difficult to stay with the breath is to train your mind in skillful thinking. This doesn't just mean watching your thoughts and letting them take you all over the place. What I mean is training your mind to think of a theme of Dhamma that is meaningful to you, that you have some prior knowledge of, and you can think through. So, for example, it could be the theme of metta, goodwill. And you just think to yourself for a while, as you're sitting in meditation, how do I practice metta, goodwill, for myself, for others? What does it involve? It's what we call a discursive meditation. And there are many, many themes you can pick up. It could be recollecting the qualities of the Buddha or a teacher. It could be the theme of goodwill. It could be the recollection of your own physical body, going through the 32 parts of the body and so on. You're giving your mind a theme to work on, and the aim is to think about that theme, just using the power of thought and memory, what you remember about that theme, but not to let your mind wander from that theme. You're training your mind to stay within the theme that you've given it. That is also quite a challenge, but it may be easier than staying with the breath if your mind is really scattered or thinking a lot. Well, you're giving it something to do using thought in a wise, skillful way. And many people find this is a very, very good way to prepare for the breath meditation when the mind won't settle down on the breath. Or another way, a friend of mine, a monk, he said he had lots of problems with this thinking mind that just wouldn't stop thinking and seemed very uncontrollable. Whenever he meditated, it just seemed to think and think and think, and very frustrating. So he couldn't stay with the breath, so he practiced what he called like beginner's vipassana. So in vipassana meditation, you're focusing on the three characteristics of phenomena, whether it's physical or mental phenomena. You're focusing on the impermanent nature of the phenomena, the unsatisfactory nature of phenomena, and the selfless nature of phenomena. And normally we practice vipassana when our mindfulness is strong and we can contemplate and observe experience easily and clearly without distraction. But you can also begin your meditation with the practice of vipassana, except you understand that in the beginning you will be just thinking about vipassana, thinking about the Dhamma. But you pick one part of the vipassana meditation. So this monk, he picked the reflection on impermanence, the arising and passing away of mental states, thoughts, feelings, memories, physical sensations. And he would just focus his mind on impermanence, the impermanence of thought in particular, because he was plagued by so many uncontrollable thoughts. And he really wanted to develop this practice, so he went off to a cave. We have some of our monasteries in Thailand have caves, so he went off to a cave and sat down to meditate every day, contemplating impermanence. So he said he just watched every thought that arose and told himself, it's anicca. Anicca means impermanent or transient, changeable. So he used the word anicca as a kind of mantra, something to recite. And he said, it's impermanent, or it's anicca. So every time a thought arose, he'd watch that thought come up and then watch it pass away and focus on the passing away of the thought. Because every thought is temporary, isn't it? Some of our thoughts are very complex, elaborate chains of verbalization, different ideas, concepts. Sometimes there's visual images. Some of our thoughts are very fleeting, just a moment's thought, just a few words or an idea pops in the mind and then it's gone. But what they all have in common is they're impermanent. So he just focused on the impermanence of his thoughts. So it's almost like watching cars go by on the highway. You know, there's another one, it's gone. There's another one, it's gone. So he's watching his own thoughts arise, pass away, and particularly focusing on the cessation of each thought, till that became his habit during the meditation, just noticing thoughts ending. And he said this was very helpful for him because normally he noticed he was more focused and caught out by the arising of each new thought. You know, in the beginning of his meditation, that would be what distracted him. A new thought, think it through, verbalize it, run with that train of thought for a while until the next thought came along. And he'd always be caught out by the arising of a new thought. So his mind was never peaceful, never settled down. So he changed it with this contemplation of impermanence. He would just watch each thought pass away. And he said he got to the point where his mind was very still on the inside, and then thoughts were more like just superficial things. He said, you know, like waves on the ocean, just coming and going. But then there's the underneath part of the ocean which is still and not affected by the waves on the surface. And he said his awareness became more like that, just observing his thoughts arising, ceasing, and not getting caught up with them. And that's something we can all do if we try, but whether you're focusing on the breath or you're contemplating the impermanence of thoughts, the important thing is the effort, the skillful effort to bring up mindfulness, clear comprehension, full awareness of what you're doing, and stick with it. You need patience as well. And you'll probably find if you practice regularly, every day, then you get better at it, and you become more used to letting go of thoughts, focusing on what you want your mind to focus on, say the breath, and you become more skilled at it. So stick with it, be patient, and don't get put off by the endless appearance of new thoughts seeming to bother you, but just work with them to try and work out how you can establish mindfulness and let them go and not give them so much importance in your mind.
หลวงพ่อ How important is it to have faith in the Buddha to practice meditation? Thank you.
Well, not everybody begins the practice of meditation being a Buddhist, especially nowadays. It's a very popular activity, and many non-Buddhists practice it. And that just shows you it's the practice of meditation, what we might call the cultivation of the mind, is something that human beings can do. It's not dependent on being a Buddhist as such or being a religious person. It's something that you might choose to do because it helps you to be more peaceful and understand yourself better. And that's a good thing, I think most people would agree. But there is an advantage as one becomes more aware of the Buddhist teachings through study, listening them, practicing them. One gains a lot of strength of mind through that faith in the Buddha, the faith in the Buddha's enlightenment. If you have that trust and confidence in the wisdom and the compassion of the Buddha, it's an endless source of skillful mind states, giving you energy, giving you support and strength of mind as you practice meditation. So many people find just reciting the name of Buddha or thinking of the Buddha immediately brings up quite a skillful state of mind, a feeling of peace, even happiness, which is a very good starting point for your meditation. Or during the meditation when mindfulness is lapsing and you're becoming sleepy or distracted or want to give up the meditation, again, recollecting the Buddha brings one back to the present moment, gives strength of mind, gives one's energy. So this is something that many people have found as they progress in their practice. They do recollect the Buddha more. First of all, maybe just the historical Buddha and the external qualities that we apply to the Buddha and describe a Buddha. Maybe they recollect them first, but later they become more aware that these inner qualities of awareness, compassion, wisdom are what actually make a Buddha. So people become more aware of the internal Buddha through the practice. And again, this gives them great strength and grounds them in their practice. And it's very reliable recollection. Like the Buddha himself said, if you're struggling, think of the Buddha, and this will bring you some peace and energy at that time. If you're afraid, so like monks, he said, well, monks, when you go out into the forest and you're afraid, you're alone, you're in the dark, or there's some wild animal around, or you're afraid of ghosts or afraid of disease or something, think of the Buddha, and this will steady your mind and give you strength at that difficult time. So many people find as their practice develops, they do start to think of the Buddha more, and it brings them a lot of peace and happiness.
Luang Por, when we have a heavy work schedule, how can we practice Dhamma at the same time? Thank you.
Well, it must be challenging when you have, say, you have a job to do, family to support perhaps, and you've got many duties and you're surrounded by other people who may not be practicing the Dhamma, then the challenge is to bring the Dhamma into your daily life and not get so lost in the work or absorbed in it that you forget the Dhamma. So, like tonight we chanted the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, and the Buddha laid out the Eightfold Noble Path. So one factor of the path is what we call right livelihood. So that may be a good starting point for you if you have a busy job that demands your time and energy every day. You at least try to make sure that your job is falling in line with the guidelines of right livelihood. Which, simply speaking, you work in a way and do things that don't harm other people. So try not to exploit or physically or verbally harm others through your actions, your speech as you work, and your very job, the job you do, try not to hurt others through your job. Try to be honest, fair, and so on. There's various qualities that right livelihood brings up. So this is something to reflect on, so that even though your job may be very demanding, distracting, as long as it's within the guidelines of right livelihood, you can trust that it's something that is not going to be directly or intentionally harming other people. And then try to keep the precepts as you work. The 5 precepts are the guidelines for the Buddhist path that leads to the end of suffering. So that's a reflection that you can constantly bring up. Am I keeping the precepts today as I work? And you may work hard, you may find it very challenging, your job, tiring, frustrating, but you can always come back to the reflection on, am I keeping the precepts? And if not, how can I improve that? How can I improve my speech or my actions? How do I improve the way I relate to the people I work with? How I spend my time as I work? What kind of, how do I react or deal with stressful situations, stressful people, using the 5 precepts as a guideline? Most people find that a very fruitful thing, and you may not be able to keep the 5 precepts perfectly from day one, but you use them as a recollection and a guideline for making decisions and improving your life as you work. And then practicing mindfulness, right mindfulness as you work, is probably the most powerful and useful quality to bring up, because even the busiest work situation, if you're consciously using it to develop mindfulness, then you can find that mindfulness brings out many other good qualities. When you have mindfulness, you're more in self-control, more aware of what you're thinking, saying, doing. You can make better choices, wiser choices, more compassionate choices in the things you do because you're mindful. And the work tends to go better. Time tends to go quickly when you're mindful. You're not focused on when's the job going to be over, when am I going to get home, and all the sort of more distracting emotions and associated ways of thinking don't come up so much when you're just focused mindfully on doing the job the best way you can. When you're practicing mindfulness, you find that even heavy work becomes kind of timeless. You're just doing the job, whether it's repeated physical actions, repeated mental actions, or it involves verbal actions, talking to others and so on. If you bring mindfulness into your job and you're paying attention to the present moment, just trying to do the job in the best way you can, time tends to go quickly. You're not so focused or thinking so much about what are you going to get in return for this job, all this hard work you're doing. You're focused more on just doing the job itself, and it even becomes quite enjoyable. So there are plenty of teachings and guidelines in the Buddhist teachings for this, for how to incorporate the Eightfold Path, Eightfold Noble Path into your job. And it's up to us to start applying it. Sit down and think how your job fits with the Eightfold Noble Path. How can you apply the qualities, the factors of the Eightfold Path with your job? And then see about practicing. And you may even find, if you practice mindfulness in daily life, things that used to be unbearable become bearable. Things that seem to be pointless become more useful, more helpful to you, and so on. Things can improve. You ask the monks living in a monastery, and we do many repetitive, what you might think boring jobs like cleaning and maintaining and administration and so on. But when you practice it with mindfulness, you don't think so much about the negative side of things. You're just working at something that maybe is necessary, is useful. You do it as a job, but mindfulness brings a wholesome, skillful attitude to what you're doing. And then time passes and you focus on the benefit of it. Then when you come to meditate, after doing that work, your mind is not too stirred up or caught into too many negative thoughts, views and opinions, because you've been maintaining mindfulness through your work period, through your work. So it is a challenge, but we have to learn how to practice the Dhamma as we work.
Luang Por, I have a friend who is depressed. How can I help them? Thank you.
Well, I think everybody who's unenlightened experiences depression sometimes. Most people, hopefully, it's just temporary. When things go badly, things go wrong, we don't get what we want, we may fall into a sadness or depression. So it is part of the human experience until we've trained our mind to let go of that and the causes of it. But some people, unfortunately, fall into deeper kinds of depression, and maybe the first thing to do is help them get to someone who is skillful, so a GP or a counsellor or a therapist, someone who can give them some help. And then to be a friend to that person. If they are already a friend, someone, an acquaintance or a family member, then your friendship can be valuable to them, to help them, support them through that time. And the good news is that, people can come out of depression, especially the more we understand the causes of our depression, the more we may be able to remedy it, even though it takes time. And so if you have a supportive friend through that, that can be amazing. So often a friend can't do much. If you're not a skilled healthcare professional, you're not a monk or a nun, but you're just a friend to someone, you may not be able to do a lot, but it's simply by being a friend, willing to listen, willing to give some positive advice, some positive support, may be invaluable to that person. So you don't necessarily have to do a lot of amazing things. Maybe just be willing to listen to them, take them out, encourage them to do things when they maybe would prefer just to sort of sit in bed or be at home because of the depression. Maybe find some skillful things that you can do together and help them. So if they're Buddhist, we might do something like chant and meditate together, or go and offer dana to some sangha together. If they're not Buddhist, maybe just finding something skillful to do together, go for a walk in the countryside, do some voluntary work, whatever, that just gives them some human support, human warmth through their condition, through their situation. And it will depend on their karma and their situation, how deep the depression is, how effective and how much help you can give them. But it's worth trying.
Luang Por, how do you practice mindfulness when you're ill? Thank you.
When you're ill, both physical and mental illness, but particular physical illness, it's one of the biggest challenges to the practice of mindfulness. But because of that, it can be a time when you really understand your mind better and understand your life better and progress in your practice of mindfulness and insight into the Dhamma, into the truth. And particularly Sangha, monks and nuns I know who have been caught up in various illnesses but have used them as a vehicle for continuing their practice and learning how to practice with their illness, not let it sort of overcome them or defeat them, but just learning how to be mindful, bring up mindfulness with strong physical feelings, the limitations that illness brings. And many of them have found great insight from those experiences, or on a few occasions people have even said they became enlightened, or even reached a stage of enlightenment, having to work with particularly the pain of illness, the discomfort, and as an ongoing thing, because often illness can be chronic, it can last for weeks, months, years, or even a whole lifetime. But if one is determined to incorporate the problem into the practice rather than let it be an obstacle that stops you practicing, then you can often get good results. So with illness you have to be patient. That's why we call people in hospital patients. You have to be patient, and you have to be wise in your attitude to the practice when you're ill. Like many meditators who are quite skilled at maintaining samadhi and mindfulness normally find it very difficult when they're ill, because physically you lose your energy, and that puts pressure on mind and body. So you have to adjust your expectations, and maybe mindfulness practice when you're ill is learning simply not to fall into a negative state of mind, maybe your first goal or first aim, because most people find that when they get ill they easily become irritated, frustrated, depressed, sad. So learning to keep your mind in a wholesome state, that may be your first effort as you practice mindfulness. And it requires mental effort, requires skills. But if you take your situation when you're ill as a situation that you're practicing in, you don't just give up, then that may be your first aim, just how to bring up mindfulness of wholesome mental states, bring them up. So again, going back to recollecting the Buddha or the Dhamma, the Sangha can help give you some strength and inspiration when you're ill. Recollecting other practitioners who have worked with their illness can give you inspiration and strength to get through yours. Some of the people I've found most inspiring in my life as a monk is people you've met who have been ill but kept up their Dhamma practice. So, some people, I remember one doctor, she was dying of cancer, stomach cancer, so she was basically starving to death. Went to visit her, but she was very serene even though she had terrible physical pain. So I was asking her how she practices, and she said, well, one good thing is she can keep the precepts every day in hospital. There's no need for her to break any precept at any time. And recollecting that brought her great happiness. When you're ill, you often feel you're useless, that you can't do anything, because you often associate life with all these activities and things you normally do. When you're ill, you can't. But she was quite wise. She said, well, I can keep the 5 precepts every day, so I'm mindful of my precepts and I'm mindful that I am keeping the precepts. And that brought her a lot of happiness. Then she said she's mindful of the Buddha as her teacher. She's always recollecting the Buddha with gratitude, the fact that she had been a Buddhist, come in contact with the teachings, all the good things she had learned from being a Buddhist and from the Buddha's teachings. she was grateful for that, and that brought her a lot of strength of mind to deal with the pain. And then she practiced anapanasati every day, mindfulness of breathing. And she said, well, it's hard because there's so much pain and I feel really weak. But then I don't have a lot of other things to do, lying in a hospital bed. So she had a lot of time to practice meditation. So she did it. And she said she found it brought her a lot of peace, bringing up mindfulness. The first thing was it helped to bring her mind to the present moment, because she said when she first got into the hospital, she was overwhelmed by like daydreams, fantasies, all kinds of mental images popping up because you feel weak, you're in an unusual environment in hospital. And she said, and I think many people have this same problem, it's loads and loads of dreams, fantasies, because your mind almost wants to escape from the situation. It doesn't like the pain, the discomfort of the body, it's in hospital, it just wants to get out. So all kinds of dreams and images were coming up, which were quite tiring, draining and confusing for her. So she found doing mindfulness of breathing helped to reduce that very quickly. And then she started to get some happiness from the mindfulness of breathing, so then the mind wasn't seeking to escape into fantasy and daydreams all the time. So that was very helpful for her. And then she also reflected on the impermanence of the body. She was dying of cancer, she knew that. So she developed that awareness and the acceptance that the body is something that's impermanent, to be let go of. So mindfulness of the impermanence of the body, she said, really helped her just to focus more on the mind itself, because the body was kind of a lost cause. She couldn't do much about that and the feelings coming with the body, but she could focus on the mind with mindfulness. So with the breathing meditation, recollecting the Buddha, recollecting her sila, she said she had a source of happiness that helped to keep her going through that illness until she died, and she did die in hospital. But one of the comments all her friends made was that she was so serene and peaceful in her illness. She was an inspiration, and people would notice this. They'd go and visit her, and it was like a reflection for them. The healthy people with their busy lives, social lives, jobs, families, would go and visit the serene person who was ill, and they realized how unpeaceful their lives were. In good health, they were rushing around but full of stress and worries and stuff. And the one who was facing death seemed to be much more peaceful and wiser than the rest of them. So if you get it right, develop this wise attitude, develop mindfulness, and use your illness as a teaching to practice with, well, maybe you actually gain something very good from it. And this is something you get from the Buddhist teachings, is that suffering is unpleasant in its nature, it's painful, but it's also our best teacher. And if you use it as a teaching, then you can rise above it and get your mind to a much better place because of the suffering, if you treat it properly. Treat it as a noble truth, rather than just succumb to it, give in to it, and then suffer with the suffering. So try and use illness like any other problem in life. Try and use it as a teacher, and it may even lead you to something good, unexpectedly.
Lompa, do you have any inspiring stories of Ajahn Chah to tell us for his birthday? Thank you.
Well, tonight we are celebrating Ajahn Chah's birthday. But in terms of inspiring teachings, well, best thing would be go and read the biography or any of his talks, and from cover to cover it's inspiring. His whole life was inspiring. His personal practice was inspiring. The sacrifice he made to teach the Sangha and laity was inspiring. Every last bit of it was inspiring. So where do you start? I don't think there's any one particular story or incident that is more inspiring than any other. Anybody who came in contact with him found him inspiring. One of the world's most amazing people, great contribution to the world, his life. Even people who never met him find him inspiring through his books and talks and so on. Sometimes particularly in the circles of the Sangha, the way we look at inspiring teachers, at the end of their life, we cremate them, usually, and then we collect their bones, the bones of the teacher, and we have this thing, the enlightened teachers seem to produce relics. So Ajahn Chah knew this, that people love to collect relics. Like in the time of the Buddha, when the Buddha passed away, they were going to have a war over his relics. He was so loved and respected. All the kings in the immediate regions of where the Buddha had lived and practiced and taught were going to fight over it. So 8 kings came together to have a big punch-up over collecting the Buddha's relics. And not a very Buddhist response, but that's the way attachment is. When you attach to a teacher, sometimes you want to fight over the teacher's relics. But luckily they had some negotiations, and a very wise Brahmin sorted it out, and so the relics were separated and given in small amounts to each king, and they took them away to build stupas and to worship. So the relics of enlightened masters, the Buddha and enlightened masters, can cause a lot of desire and attachment to arise for their disciples. So Ajahn Chah sort of foresaw this, and the Sangha, in line with his wishes, when after he passed away and was cremated, they decided not to distribute his relics because it could become the basis for something commercial, people buying and selling them or fighting over them. So they sealed them all up in little containers, completely sealed inside, and distributed them to all the branch monasteries just to put on shrines and make a suitable place to remember the teacher by, have some of his bones there, but nobody could actually see them. And then the main body of the bones were kept where he was cremated, in the main stupa at Wat Bapong, his monastery, and you can still go and see them today. They're kept in a glass reliquary, or like glass pagoda inside the stupa, and you can go and bow and see the relics there. But there were a few small relics that came with the dust when they cleaned the ash out of the oven. There was a very small amount of dust was collected on wet rags. Even that was collected by dedicated monks and novices, and they found that the dust from his ashes, even that turned to relics, little crystallized, perhaps bone fragments or whatever, fragments from the body crystallized, and they were kept. And then during his life, we used to shave his head every 2 weeks, and then his hair was distributed amongst the monks, and then the monks might distribute them on to lay supporters and other people. So over the years, Ajahn Chah's hair has been collected and venerated, put on shrines and kept in precious places, and people have found that has turned to crystal. Many monks and even lay people have Ajahn Chah's hair kept, and they found it's turned into crystal, which is usually seen as a sign of an enlightened teacher. The hair crystallizes. One monk collected even some of his blood, which came out during one period where we were caring for him, and that turned to crystal. I knew one novice who liked to collect Ajahn Chah's fingernail clippings, and that turned to crystal. So it's not uncommon in the Buddhist world for the bones or the body parts of the master to crystallize, sometimes before they die, sometimes after they die. And that's always people find that inspiring. It's a sign that, oh, must be an enlightened teacher, a real arahant. And knowing that, when after we finished Ajahn Chah's funeral, some of the monks had the thought, they remembered Lumpur Man, one of Ajahn Chah's teachers. After his funeral, they dug up his toilet pit from the ground. The earth, which had become dry, didn't smell, it wasn't unpleasant. They dug that up and they found it full of relics from the body parts, and the food that had gone through his body had actually come out and be turned into relics, having been in his body. So they thought, well, maybe we should dig up Ajahn Chah's toilet pit. So that was one thing I personally did with a couple of other monks and novices. We dug up his toilet pit and put it into many sacks. So it was like just sandy earth. It wasn't smelly or unpleasant. And we took it back to Ajahn Anand's monastery, where I used to live, and we spread it out on the forecourt in front of the meditation hall in the sun to dry, and then the monks and novices sat around for many days sieving the contents of Ajahn Chah's toilet pit, separating out the bits of grass and earth and roots and mud and sand, and ending up with what we believe to be relics. And thousands of relics were collected in that way through a very refined, lengthy process of filtration and sieving. We still have some of those relics here today in the monastery, and I know many other monasteries have them as well. So even Ajahn Chah's excrement turned into relics. Unusual thing which most people in the world don't think about, I think, but for those with faith in enlightened teachers, we do sometimes think of that. And so even his feces ultimately became crystallized relics, and people have kept them. So his bones, the different body parts, all became relics. And we say that's the sign of a fully enlightened arahant. Their body parts become relics after the cremation. So that's something to think about tonight. We're celebrating Ajahn Chah's birthday. He would have been 102. So when you hear his talks, which you can still hear the translated talks on the web, or read his books, you're reading the words or listening to the words of a fully enlightened being. And there are not many of them in the world. So I would advise you to value those words. To me, they're the most valuable words in the world. We hear so many words every day from the news, from entertainment, from our friends, our family, from our work. And of course, much of that is useful and necessary, but none of it is as good as the words of an arahant. So whatever you've heard and learnt from Ajahn Chah, take it to heart, and you might find that it really helps you in your life. So maybe we'll finish there tonight. Were there any other questions? Oh, well, time is probably up. What we'll do, if your question was not answered tonight, we will save it for next week, and we will endeavour. So be patient, which is something Ajahn Chah taught us to be. And next week we'll answer those questions that we didn't get to today. So for now we'll finish here, and we'll just pay respects to the Buddha Dhamma Sangha. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Buddhaṃ Bhagavaṃ Abhivādemi. Sākāto Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammam Namasami. Supatipanno Bhagavato Sāvaka Saṅkho Saṅkhaṃ Namā